All right. Today's date is March 23rd, 2012. The time is approximately 1 p.m. This interview of Nancy Kline, right, is being conducted by Inspector Brett Lysette from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement Office of Executive Investigations. This interview is being conducted at the law offices of
Meyer, Brooks, Demma, and Bloom. That's Blohm, P.A.
All right, in Tallahassee, Florida. So, present during the interview is
Nancy Kline.
Nancy Kline, representing
I'm
you.
Ron Meyer, her attorney, and Martin Powell is also her attorney.
Okay. Ms. Kline, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement is conducting an independent investigation regarding allegations brought against you related to cheating on a certification exam. Again, this certification exam isn't a state-sanctioned certification exam, but exam that's put on by a private organization, the Florida Association of District School Superintendents. You understand why we're here
Yes.
today? Okay. And you're familiar with the complaint? You've seen the complaint?
I've seen it
Okay.
and read it.
So, do you understand that this is a completely voluntary interview? You are not
Yes.
compelled to be here?
Yes,
You can
I
leave
understand
anytime
that.
you want, in the interview anytime you want?
Yes.
Okay. Before I swear you in, I want you to understand that if you do provide false statements, you could be criminally charged with perjury. Do you understand?
Yes.
Okay, please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
All right. And do you also understand that our interview is being recorded?
Yes.
All right. Could you just please state your full name, date of birth, and address for me for the record?
Nancy Kline, 8721 Southwest Pitts Court, Stuart, Florida, 34997, 101854.
All right. Well, Ms. Kline, thank you very much. I know you had to travel up here for us today. I'm glad you had other business, to attend to while you came up here, but we do appreciate it. We promise not to take too much of your time. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement received some correspondence from Doug Griffin, the Martin School Board attorney. You know Mr. Griffin, right?
Yes, I do.
As the attorney for the school board. And you are also, of course, the superintendent for Martin County.
That's
is that
correct.
Right? About how long have you been
About
there?
3.5 years.
3.5 years? Okay. And you're coming up for another election pretty
That's
soon?
correct.
Is that right? Okay. And when is that
August.
supposed to? August? Okay. Mr. Griffin's correspondence that was sent to us was actually sent to him by Miss Kim Sable. Do you know who Miss Sable is?
Yes, she's our labor relations employee at the
Okay.
district.
For the school board.
That's correct.
Okay. Well, in her correspondence to Mr. Griffin, she kind of lays out a conversation that she had with Miss Terry Kinney. Do you know who Miss Kinney is?
Yes.
Okay. Who is Miss Kinney?
She's a contractor/consultant that worked for the district when I was first elected.
Okay. And is she there any longer?
She's no longer there.
She's no longer
She
there?
had, I believe, I think she had one contract
Okay.
initially, and then she was no longer, there was not a subsequent contract to that.
Okay. So she had a consulting contract with
Correct.
the school, and do you remember or recall when she left or when that contract came up? If you don't, it's okay.
No, she did some volunteering after the contract was complete, but I don't know
Okay.
exactly the date.
Okay. Now, what Ms. Sable talks about in this complaint is a conversation that she had with Ms. Kinney, and to summarize it, basically identifying or stating that at one time in late 2009, that you and Ms. Kinney had a phone conversation, and this phone conversation, what was involved during that conversation, I should say, was an assistance that Miss Kinney provided to you on an exam, allegedly, of course, on an exam that's related to the Florida the
Superintendent's.
the Florida Superintendent Special Certification Program. And you're aware of this because you've read this, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So let's go back. Have you taken the Florida certification, Superintendent Special Certification course?
I have. There's 2 of them, and I've just about completed the second one, and I believe the one that Mrs. Kinney and Mrs. Sable talk about in this complaint would be the certification one.
Okay. So let's talk about that certification one. Let's go back. When did you take the program? I understand that it's over several weeks, over several months. Do you recall?
I recall that it began when I became superintendent. I believe we It was introduced to us initially, probably at one of our first meetings, and then it went over a course of quite a few months, probably more than 6 months.
And do you recall what year? Or date-wise, do you recall?
I believe it's in 2009. I was elected I was sworn in 2008 in November, and I believe it would have been throughout 2009.
Okay. So, and I believe I have the correct agendas here that they provided to me, the people who put on the course, the organization that puts on the course. And does it sound right? What I have, at least for the tape, is agendas that they provided to me, and it says economic forces impacting education was late January of 2009, legal aspects February 2009. The next one was in March, leadership conference, and I believe the fourth one is collective bargaining, human resources in April. Does that sound about right, the first several months of 2009?
I think so. I'm not sure that I attended. I think there was one time when FADS canceled the conference, and I think there was one time when I was unable to attend. And so, but I think.
But we're talking about the right year for when
Right.
you were taking
Right.
the courses. Okay. Real briefly, Reader's Digest version, could you tell me kind of how they facilitated the courses? You know, did they do tests? Were there quizzes? You know, just real generally
I think
speaking.
that the overarching theme was always learnings. They called it learnings, that there were opportunities for learning how to work with your executive leadership team, for learning how your district ran, for doing practical assignments in terms of these overall learnings.
Okay, and a little further about facilitation, just you and attendees would come to a facility, sit down for the week, you know,
Be a couple of days.
Couple days.
It would be a couple of days. Sometimes they would be hooked on to a regular superintendent's training. I believe sometimes it could be at the end of those trainings. So it was periodic.
Okay, and that's what I'm saying, just facilitation of the classes, superintendents together, classroom environment, and do any
Yes,
type,
it would be in
type of
kind of a conference
room,
area,
right.
and we would generally focus on what we called learnings. We
Right,
would learn from
okay.
each other. We would learn from.
Right. Okay, so now my understanding is that there were tests associated with kind of not each topic, but a set of topics. Is that correct?
I believe there were 4 or 5 examinations.
Okay. When were those examinations given to the group, or you can again tell me how that was facilitated? You know, after the 3 or 4 days it was completed, the last day of the course, they sit you guys down and have everybody take the exam. How did they?
I don't know that I can recollect exactly how
Yeah, that's
that
fine.
took place. I do recall one meeting, and I don't know if it was the beginning or the end of the last one or when, but I remember at one particular meeting sitting with a group of superintendents, just like we are here around the table, answering some questions and putting the response in the middle of the table. That's the only one that I remember doing that way.
Okay, so the other 4 or 5, 3 or 4 tests that you took, how did you take those?
I'm not exactly sure, other than I believe that I know that 3 of them, I believe, came in a group, and they were emailed to me, and there was a period of time, probably as many as, I don't know, several months in between when they were emailed and when they may have been returned. I worked on those kinds of, that kind of set of questions, and I probably returned them the next time I went, but I can't be certain.
Okay, so basically what you're saying is that on a majority of the tests, maybe 3, maybe even 4, give or take, that you actually did them individually, that the tests were actually emailed to you, you worked on them separately, individually by yourself, and then eventually returned them to
Right, I never,
the association.
because I never received for let's just say the first test, I never received one back, or I didn't ever, receive a grade or a pass-fail, or,
Right.
so
You didn't know how you did on the test. I'm sure if you would have failed, they would have told you, but you don't know. You assumed you passed.
Yeah, it was all associated around what they kept talking about was learnings.
Right. Was it, to your recollection, was that typical of attendees of the course to receive these exams individually through email or through whatever other source and take that way?
I don't know. I don't have any, I won't have any knowledge of that. I never really, I don't know.
Well, was there any reason, I spoke with FADS and they said that sending tests out to individuals isn't typical. It's been done. It's just not typical. So was there, usually they told us that it would be given in a setting, so was there some reason, could you not attend classes? Did you have to leave early? Was there some reason that you can recall that you actually received the test and did them that way?
I wouldn't know that answer. I mean, I don't know that because I would have no way of knowing that that was different than, I don't know the answer to that.
So, okay, let's go back. Let's just say the first course that you took. Did they explain to you how the testing process would work? Did they ever do that throughout any of the courses that you took?
I don't recall any particular specific rules. I know the tests were never, or at least the one test that I particularly remember taking with a group, it was never proctored. There was no, it was just not a proctored test. Mm-hmm. And so that's really, that test I know about, and then the other ones, which were very much what I would think of as take-home, independent, open book learnings, opportunities to do a test in that way. I don't know. I don't know how to answer it.
Okay, so you don't recall at any time the, well, not teachers, but the administrators of these courses. Mm-hmm. You don't recall at any time them saying, there'll be a test at the end of the course, we'll take it, in a, the setting that we're in right now. If you can't be here that day, we'll send it to you later. You don't recall any of that ever occurring?
I just don't. But I mean, I do know that there was, I do know there was a discussion on 5 particular topics. So I don't know. Right. So I just don't know.
So you don't, okay. Which is, but the one test you do remember taking was in a group setting.
Of about four there were probably about 4 or 5 of us around a table with a white tablecloth on it. It was like a table that would be at a conference. Right. And so I remember taking one then. I never received anything back. I could have taken more than that. I don't know, but I just remember that one.
I think prior for you to come up here, we spoke earlier and asked you if you could look back at your calendar to try to recall when you took the courses, when you may have taken tests. Did you bring that with you?
Let me ask you, it was my understanding that there was one particular test that was in question here.
Yes.
And that's the collective bargaining.
Correct. I just wanted to try to get a background of how the course was facilitated first. That's what I'm trying to do right now. You need your calendars?
I do. I have it.
It's always good being organized, isn't it?
I brought superintendent's calendar. There we go. Do you want it?
Well, and I'll just ask you, just for the record, do you have on your calendar, or do you recall when you actually attended the courses and or when you were taking the tests? Made notes like, on such and such a date, I worked on this test. Do you have any of that in your calendars? Whether it be a business calendar or a personal calendar?
No, not that I know of.
Okay, so timeline-wise, the only thing that you can tell me is that I went through the courses and I took the tests, but I can't give you any specific dates when that occurred.
That's correct.
Okay.
in this particular calendar, which I think was the date in question,
Mm-hmm.
from September 22nd to September 24th, actually September 25th, it lists that I'm at a FADS fall conference.
Oh, okay, and before we get to that, I'll finish up. So just again to summarize the agendas that I said and the dates, you say those appear to be right. You said you may not have been able to attend one particularly, and then they rescheduled another one. Generally speaking,
there could have also been a time where I either left early or came late, depending on the school district's schedule for some other events.
And then it would also be fair to say then that the tests related to the subject areas that FADS gives out were given to you after all this coursework had been taken. So in other words, if the last one, let's say per the agenda, was March, you may have received the other 3 tests after that. Is that right?
I would presume that.
Okay. And that's, I'm just trying, like I said, I'm just trying to clear up since you said you didn't take any tests after the actual course, and that it was later sent out to you. Just later.
When you say she didn't take it after the actual course, you mean at the end of a particular session?
Yeah, where it was defined about when the session was,
right.
where if I were to go ask other superintendents, they may have said, we took it that Friday before we left. I'm just assuming that I haven't done that, but in your case, you're saying that I received multiple tests after the courses had been provided.
Maybe it would be helpful.
Sure. Because I think after getting that, we'll get to the specifics of the complaint.
Here's the example, because this is one we were focusing on.
Sure.
This is the material for the collective bargaining in April. And I mean, as you go through it, I mean, it's lots and lots of material,
yes,
resources, but what's conspicuously absent is any examination, any discussion of how you're going to be tested, if you're going to be tested, anything.
And these were the questions that we were just asking Ms. Kline.
So there's just nothing there. Whether she doesn't recall. Well, do you recall whether at the end of this you got a test handed to you?
I don't recall.
Right.
And
you said earlier that you do recall receiving an email, multiple tests.
And here's the email.
Okay, so you do have a copy of the email. So in June, it looks like, for the record, we have a email from Rosemary Taylor. From Diane Morrell to Nancy Kline, and the subject, it has attachments. It has a collective bargaining exam, economic forces exam, core concepts, leadership document, special certification application. So in other words, we have a collective bargaining exam, economic forces exam that was sent to you on June 22nd.
I think there's 3 sent to me on that time, and then there was another email when another one was sent, and it was also sent via email, and it may have been a redundant one of those tests.
And it says, good afternoon, Nancy. Attached are 3 exams for the Superintendent Special Certification Program that you will need to take. Please complete and return the exams to me at your earliest convenience. Also included is the application for certification. Please complete, sign, have notarized, and return the original to me. Let me know if you have any questions. Okay, and that's good. I mean, that kind of answers the question I just asked, is when you were given these exams, and here it says June 22nd. So.
And I think the other point of clarity is that, the course was April. The exams were provided, to her back in the district in June. Whether they were provided before that, she just doesn't recall. And they were turned in, apparently, at the September conference. So, there's a span of like 5 months.
Well, and so we'll get now. So we'll go ahead and get to that. So you've provided kind of a generalized version of what your recollection was of taking these courses. Beginning of the year. You may have missed some, they may have rescheduled one. There were exams. You remember taking one of them in particular with a group of superintendents where it wasn't proctored. You guys, I would assume that you guys discussed questions, to answer the questions. I mean, was it kind of a group project type thing?
I don't think it was either. It was just, in other words, I would not say it was a group project. We were sitting there and and I just, I don't know whether I checked the boxes or filled in the answer or whatever I did, and then put it in the middle of the table. But I don't, I mean, it was not a proctored exam where you walk into a secure environment and you have no documents, you have no dialogue with him. There was no secured environment proctored test.
Well, let me ask you this. Was there discussions with other superintendents about questions on the exam?
There could have been.
Okay. You don't recall?
I don't know. I'd have to think about that.
Okay. All right. So we'll move on. So now you have these other tests. Now we'll get specific to the complaint. Okay. So Ms. Sable through Ms. Kinney basically told the school board attorney that per their conversations, it appears that you received assistance on one particular test, the collective bargaining exam. Now, you just told us a little earlier, and so did Mr. Myers, is that your recollection of events is that you did have the date of the issues that we're talking about is basically the end of September, specifically in this complaint about the 22nd is when a phone call was supposedly made, allegedly made. Now, you just provided through your calendar that from that week, I believe you said September 22nd through the 24th.
I think 25th.
25th, you said on your superintendent calendar that you were attending a FADS conference. Is that right?
That's correct.
Do you recall what that conference was for? I mean, there was no more coursework, I guess, apparently based on you finishing the course. Do you remember what that conference was about?
FADS does a regular conference, and I want to say that it could have been a fall conference. So,
I believe that's what.
So it's a FADS fall conference.
Okay, and just at the conference, what was
Well,
going
it
on?
doesn't, those conferences take place from FADS, so there may be all the superintendents there, or there may be times when it's at the end of a conference when it could be superintendents working on, certifications or...
Okay, so it could involve a lot of things, various functions.
It generally did.
Okay, and I believe it was said earlier that it's your recollection that at this time, this is when you turn the exams in, that you had previously received the completed exams. Is that correct?
I don't really know anything for a fact in terms of when I may have turned something in,
Okay.
because I don't know. I mean, I can't say for a fact.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr.
You're not being evasive. I mean,
No, I'm
you just
not.
don't have a
In
recollection
other words,
of whether it was at that conference, before, after.
I don't know whether it would be at that conference, whether it would be, I don't know.
Well, and I guess we can, let's try to do a little deduction here. You were certified in November.
Right.
That's when the letter was. You received the exams June. So we have July, August, September, and October. Basically 4 months between when you received the exams and when it was certified.
You may have received them, though, in April, if they were handed out at the end of the conference. So, I mean, there may be April to May to June to July to August, September.
Well, I think the point is that you
So
would have
there's a
had to
time
return.
frame.
You would have had to return the exam
Sometime
sometime
before
between
November.
those.
Yeah.
I
Correct.
agree.
Do you, if you don't know if you returned it during that conference, do you recall at all maybe of how long it took you to do these exams when you received them? I mean, you're a busy woman. Could it be a couple weeks, a couple months? And again, I'm just trying to create a timeline, is what I'm trying to do.
I would say that based on when the email, the email really gives us a date.
Right.
And I would presume that that all the documents are likely printed, and I began the process then.
Right.
When I finished, I don't know, but I would think I would begin it at that point.
Okay. All right. All right. Again, let's get back to the specific part of the complaint. They say specifically that you called Miss Kinney on what appears to be September 22nd per phone records identified by Miss Sable. They were Miss Kinney's phone records, but Miss Sable is the one that apparently identified the dates that this may have occurred. Again, the date is September 22nd. I think you guys know that there were phone records. Have you seen also the phone records that were attached?
Well, we
We
saw
have
the
it.
phone records that were attached to the complaint that show the initial call being an incoming call.
So are we looking at the same ones here?
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, again, for the record, we have Miss Kinney's phone records for the dates in question, basically September of 2009. And on that date, there's 2 incoming phone calls from a 772-631-0213. Is that your number?
Yes.
Okay. Again, a tough question. You're at a conference. What do you recall at all what you may have been calling Miss Kinney about?
Before she answers that, just for the record, the phone record also shows on September 22nd at 7:12 that the initial call was actually made by Miss Kinney to 772-631.
Right, and we'll be more specific. At 7:12 p.m., it looks like Miss Kinney called you for about 18 minutes. And then after that, there were 2 additional calls, one made at 8:38 from you to Miss Kinney that lasted about 64 minutes. And another one, it looks like, I can't read that time. Well, let's see if it's 64 minutes, that would have been an hour. It would have to be 9. I'm sorry? No, I'm saying if this one lasted 64 minutes, we can't, what is that, 9:42 maybe?
The second one, yeah.
Yeah, it looks like 9:42.
9:42,
Another call
that
lasted 21 minutes. So basically, evening time. Any recollection of what you called Miss Kinney about at that time?
If I had, I don't know. I mean, I talked to Mrs. Kinney. If you look at the phone records in general, probably during that time frame, I talked to Mrs. Kinney several times a day. There was several things that the district was working on that she was either an original consultant for or a volunteer for. Mm-hmm. And they were, THADS was doing an efficiency study. We were working with THADS on a study, and we had a fair amount of conversation with that. We were doing some organizational work at the district. We were also engaged in a FDLE investigation that Mrs. Sable and Mrs. Kenny were working on that particular investigation. So I would say there was often times when I spoke to Mrs. Kenny. Right. I mean, the record pretty much shows that.
And
so
and
could I specifically say, no, if there's a document, there's something that could refresh my memory, maybe I could.
Okay. So you can't you don't know specifically what you talked about to Miss Kenny on this date?
No.
Okay. I'll ask you some more specific questions. You were at this FADS conference during this time. When you spoke with Ms. Kinney, did you speak with Ms. Kinney about any collective bargaining or labor relations topics related to, anything about those topics?
I could have.
You could have. If you did, would any of that been related to you completing the exam that was previously provided to you?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know that answer.
Okay. All right, and we're talking pretty specific stuff. I mean, so you can't recall that you don't know if you had completed or finished the exam or not, and you don't recall whether you asked Ms. Kinney any questions about that exam or not?
Well, I think specifically, if we go back, I have 3 exams. Of those 3 exams, I'm not sure what I would have completed or had completed if I indeed turned those in on the 22nd. So,
right. Well, that, and again, you'll have to pardon me. That actually wasn't my question. My question is you have, based on the complaint, Ms. Kinney told Ms. Sable that you asked her questions about labor relations and collective bargaining. Ms. Kinney doesn't know what for or why. I'm asking you, had you completed the test, or were you still working on it and discussed it with Ms. Kinney?
I don't know.
You don't know. You don't know if you don't know if you turned in the test or not, or you don't know if you had finished it. You don't know if you talked to Ms. Kinney about it. Your answer is no?
Well, I think two things. One is, I don't know when I turned the test in. I don't know that the test was turned in on the 22nd. So that's the first problem. I don't know when the test was turned in.
Well, then let me ask it a different way.
Okay.
Did you ever talk to Miss Kinney to assist yourself in answering questions on any of the tests provided to you by FADS at any time?
I could have.
Okay. And you could have. Can you expound on that, or you just...
I believe I could have talked to anybody at the district, including Miss Kenny, about any of those topics that had to do with whatever those 5 examinations are.
And we'll specifically just focus on the collective bargaining labor relations part, since that's the issue in the complaint. And
maybe I could answer it
sure.
a little clearer this way.
Okay.
In my office, which is kind of a larger office than this, there's a conference room, and initially, when I first became superintendent, there were 3 desks. I had a desk in there, Mrs. Kenny had a desk, and Mrs. Sable had a desk. I believe that these tests would have been, if I had the test in June or
yes, ma'am,
whenever, June, and they're returned 4 months later, I could have had those tests. I did have those tests in the office. I know I did. So could I have discussed that test with Miss Kenny? I could have.
Okay. Is it possible, you said it could have been done in the office, is it also possible that it could have been done on this phone
Yeah,
call?
absolutely. I said I could have, sure.
So, even though you don't know for sure, I just want to be clear that you're saying that for that particular test that was in the complaint regarding collective bargaining labor relations, that it is possible that you may have discussed the tests with Ms. Kenny.
Yes.
And I believe you would have discussed it with Ms. Kenny just because she had an expertise in that kind of area. Is that right? Maybe not an expertise, but a knowledge as a consultant for the school board.
I don't believe that I don't know of her expertise in that area. No, I really don't. I mean, I don't know that.
Then why would you have discussed the test with Ms. Kenny at all?
If I discussed the test with Ms. Kenny or with anybody else, I could have done it just like it was part of the whole learning process. I used any, every, and all resources available for these self-examination learning activities. So that's how I could have discussed something with her. I could have discussed something with my assistant superintendent, because that's really what they were, was self kind of learning activities.
No,
I could have asked, I don't know, I could have asked somebody what they thought of something. I could have, had some assistance on spell check. I don't really know.
Okay, and I understand. And again, we'll try to summarize a little bit, is that when you were provided these tests, based on this email, and maybe you can tell me in class, there were no instructions on how or where or what resources you could use to take the test or answer the test questions. Is that correct?
That's correct. There was no parameter there was no parameter that I was ever advised of.
So when you received these tests, again in June, though I think you said you couldn't recollect, but you could assume that you used any and all resources available to you?
I've always used, that's kind of part of the whole FADS process, is to utilize your executive leadership team, utilize your cabinet, utilize the district resources. That's always been part of that process.
And part of the resources you may have used would have been asking various individuals of maybe particular topics associated with those tests.
I would say I could have, yes.
You could have. Okay. We'll go through some of the specifics here in the actual complaint real quick. Okay, there's particular part in here about certain questions where Ms. Kinney said that you may have to ask Mr. Frank Raffone about. I believe Mr. Raffone is
He's the assistant superintendent.
Superintendent. Is that something that you recall may have occurred in a conversation with Ms. Kinney?
No, Frank Raffone and I work very close together. He's the assistant superintendent, and we would have communicated on almost any topic.
Right, but particularly what, and I'm trying to stick.
Right.
I understand what you're saying is that it could have been, but let's stick specific to what they say when it says Miss Kline supposedly told Miss Kinney, or Miss Kinney told you at one time regarding questions about the test that she didn't know what those answers, alleged answers would be, and that you may have to go talk to Frank about those particular questions you had. Is that something that you recall you and Miss Kinney ever?
No.
Miss Kinney ever saying to you? Okay. Do you know why Miss Kinney left her employment with the school board? I know her contract ended and she did some volunteer work. Do you know why she stopped volunteering? And you told me that the consultant grant or contract was up,
Mm-hmm.
and then she started volunteering. Do you know why she left after volunteering?
My understanding is that she, she volunteered, not much, a short period of time. She volunteered for, I would guess, a couple of hundred hours after her contract was up. She then continued to have a relationship with some of the ladies at the district office that were my secretary, another secretary within the office, Kim Sable. They would go to lunch regularly. She would come by and volunteer some, so she would do that. She then, two kind of events took place in her life. Her partner developed breast cancer, and she had some commitments with kind of helping her heal. And she took a job, I believe, in New Jersey as a consultant and worked out of town for a while, and then said that she liked kind of that freedom of, she earned some money, and then she liked kind of having some time off with Anita. So that's my understanding.
Okay. Volunteer work's great, but sometimes you need to get paid too, right?
Amen.
So, did you and Miss Kinney have a decent relationship while you guys?
I think we've always had the same kind of relationship. I've had a relationship with her for, I would guess, it could be as long as 8 years. I'm not really sure. She worked as a consultant at Habitat for Humanity and a volunteer. She was both. Well, actually, maybe I'll take that back. Maybe she was just a volunteer. I don't know if she was a consultant or not. Perhaps just a volunteer. When I worked at the Early Learning Coalition, she had a small contract there to do some operational kind of work.
And good professional, you guys had a good professional
relationship? We had
relationship?
a good professional relationship. We had after, not this current year, but which would have been 2009 and 2010, I was invited to her Christmas party. She has kind of I want to call it a somewhat exclusive Christmas party on the water in Jupiter, and I would guess there'd be maybe 20 or 25 people there, and I attended her Christmas party.
So you wouldn't characterize your relationship as being negative or any tension? And like I said, I'm trying to...
No, I would say that...
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but a good professional relationship.
A good professional relationship.
Was there any negative times that you could recall?
There were times when some of the women in the office would go to lunch, and they would like for me to go, and my schedule just did not permit that. So I lunched less with them over time just because I didn't have the time. In fact, she sent me, and I brought it with me, she sent me a really nice card, which would have been right around Christmas time in 2009, saying, what a good job I was doing as a superintendent, and how she,
Right, but and the lunch is a side note. There was nothing that stressed you felt like you had a good professional relationship.
Yes.
Okay. And if we asked her, you think she would say the same?
I think so.
Okay. Another comment that was made in the allegation was, it says that Ms. Kinney later came to ask you, I would assume this answer is no because your answer to the previous question was no, but She supposedly asked you, did you ever call Frank or phone regarding some of the questions you had? You don't?
I don't recall.
Okay.
Other than Frank Raffone and I probably talk 3 hours a day.
Okay. Those are kind of the main points there in the complaint wanted to discuss. Let me ask you, when did you first become aware of this complaint?
I think I became aware of it when Mr. Griffin emailed it to the board, and then I was, then a board member contacted me. And I don't know exactly what date that was, but that's when I first became aware. I became aware that there was a potential complaint, that there was going to be a complaint in January.
Okay, and again, Ms. Sable sent her correspondence on January 22nd, so of course it would have been before that. How did you become aware that there may be a complaint?
I became aware from Rose Taylor, my secretary, Pam Busha, who is also a secretary in that office, that Mrs. Sable was looking to file some kind of retaliatory, was looking to file a complaint against me in an attempt to gain the opportunity to file a whistleblower or retaliatory complaint in terms of preserving her job.
And how were they aware of that? How were they able to?
They were aware of that through Terry Kenny.
So let me get this straight. Ms. Kinney supposedly advised them of this information that you just provided, and then they provided it to you.
Correct.
Okay. So again, from the time you became aware of it, was there any type of discussion between that time and when it was actually provided to Mr. Griffin, the complaint that is?
From that point, I actually brought it forward to Frank Raffone and said there appears to be some kind of potential risk to the district, and so I made him aware of that.
So you made him aware of it?
Asked if we should contact risk management, or if he had an opinion about it.
Administrative issues that you'd have to deal with.
Right.
I understand. Next step, what happened? So the complaint was provided to Mr. Griffin. What happened after that?
I was shocked.
As all of us would be.
Probably a couple weeks prior to that, Mrs. Kenny had called me asking me about, she called one day in the middle of the day, and I called her back at some point, and she said that she was blogging and wanted to know some specifics about something, and I just kind of said, Terry, I don't really know any of that stuff, and the reality of it is I didn't keep track of blogs, nor did I get involved in that kind of stuff. And I said, Terry, because she had been blogging, I think, prior to that for quite a while, and that's kind of hearsay because I don't know that. That would just be what I had heard. But
when you say blogging, about this issue or just about
I don't know. She called and wanted to know about. I think it was just issues in general, things that were on the blogs. And I said, Terry, I don't really know anything about that. And so I said, I don't know anything about that. And it was kind of a short conversation. And I.
Well, I'm sorry, I must be mistaken.
Okay.
How was that
related to the complaint?
Yeah.
Okay. So then that was a conversation I had. Then when I got the complaint, I called Terry and said, what is this? What's this complaint about?
So that first conversation you're talking about really had nothing to do with this,
That's
even
correct.
though you kind of knew it may be coming?
Well, I knew that was
why
probably the only real communication I'd had with her
gotcha.
in, like, say, a month.
Sure, okay. So then you get the complaint, you called Miss Kinney, asking her basically what the heck is this complaint about? What did that conversation consist of?
It was she just said that she had some boxes. She went into this whole little box thing. She had boxes, and she'd sent me a box that was an election box, and had Kim Sable return a box to me, return 2 other boxes to the district that had materials that were related to probably that FDLE investigation and FADS and all the things that she was working on. And that Kim then would not return the boxes to, didn't give me a box and didn't give the district a box, but instead took these boxes to, I guess, Doug Griffin's office, and they went through the boxes, and she just said that these, in there could have been some items related to this complaint.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but was there any discussion back and forth? I understand that part, but did you and Ms. Kinney talk about the complaint? Other than this is how it may have...
Yeah, I said to her, I said, Terry, what would there be to this complaint that help me understand this complaint, because I don't really understand it. Mm-hmm. And the only word she used to me was, well, you know, Nancy, sometimes I would scribe things that you would say so that I could keep track of them. I said, scribe? You know, I didn't...
And what does that mean?
Yeah, that's what I said. Scribe? What does that mean? Which is, you know, she would document or write down things, and we were, again, doing that FAD study. I remember coming across something not long ago where there were items that I would have talked to her about with this study, how we could implement it, and she would have scribed it and written it out and typed it and that kind of thing.
But there was no other discussion about, any more detailed discussion about the complaint other than I'm ascribing it?
I was shocked. I mean, there wasn't a lot of conversation. Okay. I was like, are you, you know, what is this about? I never, you know, I think there wasn't much conversation.
Okay. So from that point on, kind of give me what else has occurred. Have you spoken with Ms. Kinney again? Have you spoken to anybody about the complaint from the time that you received it? And I don't want to get into necessarily, well, I've discussed issues with the school board and all that kind of stuff, just more of...
Any of the witnesses?
Yeah, have you spoken with Ms. Sable? Have you spoken again with Ms. Kinney? Did your secretaries that you mentioned earlier have anything else to say about this issue?
I don't believe I've spoken to Ms. Sable. I don't believe I've spoken to the school board attorney. My conversation with my secretaries would be minimal. Any conversation I had with Mrs. Kinney would have been around that time frame. In other words, there, you know, but I don't recall any discussions other than after I got the complaint or shortly thereafter.
The conversation you told me
about. Right. So I don't know of...
Well, it's only been a couple months, and this is kind of a serious issue. I would think you'd recall if you did or not.
The conversation that I would have had with Ms. Kinney, so I had the blogging conversation, then I had a conversation probably about, we had it after I got the box, or after I got the complaint, and then we had a conversation about the boxes. She helped me understand that. So that would have been, that probably would have been in between. So it's probably blogging, and then maybe a conversation regarding the boxes.
And then the last conversation.
Right.
Okay.
I would guess, those conversations could have been call back, or back and forth. Sometimes I'm not always available, or she wasn't. So I think there probably could have been that. There could have been something else, but I don't know.
Okay. You mentioned something about Ms. Kinney allegedly telling your secretaries about this whistleblower issue, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on that, but Ms. Sable thought that her job may be in jeopardy. As the superintendent, did Ms. Sable have some concerns?
Mrs. Sable had previously filed, I think, 6 complaints at the district alleging whistleblower retaliation, always using the term, or let's see, not always. She had used the term in a whistleblower complaint, retaliation, I think, of civil rights, several complaints regarding this whistleblower status of you could make a complaint about somebody and it didn't have to be right or wrong, but that would give you whistleblower protection. She had said that, according to the secretaries, she had said that to them. So.
Right, and just, well, whistleblower is, if I give you some information and I eventually get fired, I'm kind of protected. I guess what I'm asking you is, I guess Miss Sable did file several other complaints against you and the school board, or who?
There's mostly the school board filed one against, or filed a complaint against. She originally filed a complaint against the school board members. Pretty significant complaint, pretty big, hefty kind of complaint against the board. I think this is it. And she wants protection from Florida whistleblower, retaliation, anti-bullying, fair labor standards, and hostile work environment. Then she filed, I think the second complaint was the person that investigated that complaint. She filed a complaint against him.
Wasn't happy with their investigation, huh?
Right. Then she filed a complaint against Mrs. Hershey for the same kind of thing. And then I think she sent a complaint to Claypool here in Tallahassee, complaining about maybe something related to that.
Okay.
Then she filed a complaint about David Anderson, who was a school board member. I think that complaint revolved around her mother is the,
we don't have to get in. Yeah, we don't have to get into.
Did she file any complaints against you?
No.
Okay. So Ms. Sable has a history of filing complaints, not in the too distant. I mean, are all these fairly condensed in a time period?
Within the last couple of years.
Last couple of years. Okay.
But she's never filed a complaint against me.
Right. So this is
that's the first.
Basically the first one. Okay. Was and again, this may not be as relevant as it need to be, but as a school board, the superintendent and the school board did Miss Sable have I don't know how to say this correctly. I guess had Miss Sable's work product, work ethic, work whatever been in question with the school board and yourself? I mean, is there a reason why she felt she needed protection? That's probably not the best way of saying that. I mean, I guess I don't want to.
Recently, the school board looked to subcontract her services out.
Okay.
And I actually advocated for that not to happen because I felt like it was best to have a labor relations employee within the district.
Okay.
That was within, I would say, a year.
Okay. And that kind of clears up what I'm trying to ask. I mean, was her job in jeopardy, I guess?
If you really look at the jobs within the school district, there have been very few people. Well, I don't know how to say this either. Her job was not in jeopardy with me. I had no. I had no plans to make any changes with the labor relations department.
That answers the question. Basically, Miss Sable was not in jeopardy of losing her job, at least in your mind.
Not at all.
As to the superintendent.
For a superintendent, yeah, the school board could have. Right, school board, but I'm sure you could recommend.
Actually, in fact, I did advocate for her being able to keep her job in that capacity.
All right. Is she still employed?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And just like I said, I'd like to summarize it at the very end. And you gave us, some information about the facilitation of the course and et cetera. But again, the main complaint was that you asked Miss Kinney for some assistance on one of the exams related to a course where there's salary incentive money associated to. And again, I know you've answered these questions, but I just want to answer, kind of condense it down into one last couple minutes. Or one last question or two. Earlier you said that the call reference on September 22nd, you don't recollect what the conversation was about. It could have been about various topics related to school board business, correct?
I think that's true. I think it probably was to be that length of time about various topics.
Two different, one from her, two from you, an hour and a half plus, 9 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night. Okay. But you don't recall what you may have talked about. It could have been a variety of different things.
Could have been a variety of things,
Okay.
and I did say it could have been something related to this collective bargaining.
Okay. And let me add to that, because of the question, it could have been related to collective bargaining. Could it also have been related to the test that you actually had?
I would say it could have.
Could have. Okay, and that kind of went on to my next question, is that you received 3 of these exams on the 22nd. Again, no instruction on what you could or could not do regarding completing the exams was provided.
That's correct.
And then you said from that time period to when you turned the exams in, which you don't know.
That's correct.
It could have been the September meeting when you were there.
Could have been all 3 of them then.
It could have been, right?
One of them, could have been 2 of them.
But during that time period when you were completing exams, you said it's possible that you could have discussed many of the questions on all the exams with different people.
That's correct.
Okay, and you did that because it was your understanding the test was more of a, I think you called it a learning...
self-examination,
Right.
learnings, like the end of a chapter test, you can get to the end, look at what's in the chapter, write it down,
Right.
keep it for your records so that you've kind of summarized. I would say that would be pretty accurate.
Okay. And you said it, and not trying to go on, so you said it could have been, I need to ask you, did you?
Did I talk to
Did you
Mrs.
discuss test questions throughout this period of time with various individuals?
I would say I could have, yes.
Okay, all right. I'll leave it. That's fine. Okay, and like I said, I want to make sure that the FAD's administrators never provided any instruction to say that that was not necessarily something you could or could not do, correct?
I think what I really want to emphasize,
Sure.
because I think it has to be emphasized, is that the FADS process worked quite effectively, because all of those 5 learnings, I learned a tremendous amount about those 5 things. I thought of it as very practical work, very collaborative work. It generated questions that I wouldn't have known would even come up unless I went through that process. So I think the FADS program was very effective. I think it clearly made me a better superintendent. As a district, I think we all know that it's irrefutable that as a superintendent I've excelled in terms of how our district has performed. So I think that whole process it was very effective. I never received a grade for any test. I never received a pass-fail. I never received any kind of specific instructions. Most of what I did was very practical related. I call it kind of like scholar practitioner or practical kind of work. Mm-hmm. Some of the tests I took, it wouldn't surprise me if I wrote down my answers and stuck them someplace and kept them so that I could refer to them. It was very much like that chapter test, right. Self-examination.
You didn't have a feeling that the testing was as stringent as some tests may be, whether they're proctored and instructions like that?
Well, no, actually, I specifically had no feeling of that because of the way the tests were administered.
And when you mean the way the tests were administered, you mean like how?
Well, an incredibly long span of time between when you receive a test and when it's returned, the flexibility with how you take the test or how you rely on your resources to do that,
And again, I just want to be clear, when you say rely on your resources, you say that why? Just because of the way the test was given to you?
Yeah, let's face it, I'm a superintendent. I know how testing works. I'm working on my doctorate right now. I understand how it works. If there's some kind of really specific test that you take or something really specific and they want to make sure that it's your information or your knowledge, you post it on live text, there's all kinds of ways to give tests where there's some kind of accountability. This particular learning, as it was called, just like the one with the Bring It 180, that particular program is the same program, and in fact they overlapped. That began in January of 2009, and in that particular program you could only rely on your district resources to do that work. You couldn't do it yourself.
Right, and I'm looking at some other issues. But again, to clear is that you didn't feel constrained on how you were supposed to take the test.
No, what I felt was that the outcome was to make sure you had the learning. The learning was what was key.
Okay. My last question, and then if you have any questions for me, is did you feel as if, or when you allegedly or possibly discussed test questions with other people, did you feel like you were not following the instructions provided, or that you felt that you weren't supposed to be doing that?
I think I always felt like I followed the guidelines that were present.
Okay. But did you feel like you were doing something unethical or not right?
I think I've been pretty clear. I think I followed whatever guidelines there were in terms of what the requirement was. I don't know that...
Did you think you were doing something wrong?
No.
That's what he's asking you.
Okay.
And like I said, my questions aren't meant to
I'm sorry,
trick
I'm
you.
just trying...
I know, my questions aren't to trick you. My question is because you said, well, first of all, they didn't provide any parameters.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So to say I'm following the parameters really doesn't mean much because they didn't provide any. So that's why my question to you was...
Well, that's kind of that is it. There isn't any real guidelines, so...
Right.
His question.
And that was my question, is when you were discussing test questions, maybe or maybe not, you said you couldn't recall, it's likely that it occurred, I think it's fair to say, based on some of your responses, that did you feel like you were doing something that you shouldn't have been doing?
No.
Okay. And that was my question.
Just for the record, and I think we've addressed it, and you even acknowledged the absence of parameters. But I think when you look at the guidelines that FADS has for the special certification program, while they're making some changes, I think now based upon this experience, which is fair. In 2009, their own guidelines noted that the tests are administered in group setting or individually. When taken as a group, testing conditions apply. When taken individually, there are no specific directions given about the use of resources and assistance. Superintendent can take the exam at his or her office or in another private setting. Superintendents have taken exams at the FADS office, at a hotel during another training session, or taking home and return to FADS. I think it's important to keep in mind here that whatever prospectively there may be some changes, at the time these courses were administered, and for many years up until now, there was just never any discussion. And so whether this test was, as you look at the curriculum that they hand out, it includes learning guides, it includes the test. I mean, it almost appears, and to me, I always believed, frankly, long before Ms. Kline became a client, that this was in the nature of sort of a self-test. You know, you've taken this chapter, now, you know, let's see if you know this stuff. You know, hesitate to use the word laxity, but, you know, I mean, the laxity in which this test was given out and administered, I mean...
It appears so based on being able to send tests.
If this were really, a quote, certification examination, it deserved a higher protocol, it deserved, you know, some instruction in the book that, you know,
well, that's questions to be answered by, you know,
right.
FADs here.
In the future.
In the future, yes.
But in 2009, none of those guidelines was present, and I think FADs will be candid and tell you that if they haven't. And that's why I think, rightfully or wrongfully, it's developed that, you know, you come to the course, it's an overall kind of learning experience. They immerse you into it. My experience, and I participated in some of these trainings over the years, is that, you know, it was you know, discussion, collaboration, that was all encouraged all the time. And
still is.
You know, yeah, and it's different than your law enforcement certification examination or my bar examination, which you know, has a different parameter. And again, the statute here says you complete the course for certification. It doesn't say that you achieve a certain level of grade on an examination or anything of that nature. So,
well, as you know, Ms. Myers, the concern is more of regardless of the protocol,
sure.
that if somebody did the test for somebody, that's a type of fraud, you know, and because there's incentive money attached, there could be.
Well, I understand why you're here.
That's not why, you know, that's not specifically why we're here. There was no allegation that anybody
right.
did the test for you or anything like that.
And I think at the end of the day, and I know we're still recorded here, but I think at the end of the day, the information that was relayed on probably every test, I mean, was my information. That, I mean, clearly I was the superintendent, and I think I clearly relayed the information.
Yeah, but you answered the question.
Right, but you can understand, of course, and to be just quite as, you know, blatant as we can. I mean, if you're sitting in a hotel room and the test is due, and you don't know the answers, and you call somebody up, hey, help me out. Okay, that's basically the allegation. We've discussed it, you know, and you've provided answers to the questions. And,
but the test wasn't due. She wasn't under the gun that she has to have this in at a certain time.
Well, completed.
You know, she had it for 5 months before.
Well, I understand, but and not that whether there's a time. The
right.
question still arose, you know, regardless of when it was supposed to be turned in or not.
It's a fair question to ask
exactly.
and look at.
So
and we appreciate your being here to do that.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you today that you feel would be important to our review?
I don't know. This is all kind of new to me.
Okay.
I think well, I don't know that it would be important to the review, but I think it lends itself to the understanding of how, I keep going back to the fact that I think this test examination process course works. It does work. So, but I think it's also very individual. And there were times when it probably was very individual. There was, I think there was just some real individual kind of things that took place. And one is, and I know I've said it before, there was I think we may have talked about it, I don't know, but there was a 360 kind of evaluation that I think some people did it differently than others. So I mean, I think that the course in itself being loose, and maybe that's what it is, I think it works. But if in the future, I think if there's going to be, you know, in the future, probably guidelines and that kind of thing, different guidelines that are more specific might help. So that somebody like me doesn't sit here and have to, you know, or FADS doesn't have to be under some kind of scrutiny. Because I think at the end of the day, both I earned the certification, I did an incredible amount of work for that certification. So it wasn't a gimme. Nobody gave me the certification. And you know, do I know all the answers on those tests? And do I have that information? Absolutely. Whether I had it then, I probably had it then. I probably even know more now. But at the end of the day, this is kind of unfortunate. I think it's kind of unfortunate in general because I think the system they have in place worked very well.
Okay.
Witness your number 3 rating in the district.
All right, well, and if that's it, we'll conclude the interview. The time's approximately 2:12.